Hello, and welcome everyone to the Implications for COVID-19 and Complex PTSD Opioid Use Disorder webinar. My name is Ann Chensky, and I will be one of the moderators for today's webinar. Our speaker today is Andre Johnson, President and CEO of Detroit Recovery Project. This webinar is brought to you by the ATTC, PTTC, MHTTC, and SAMHSA. The Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC are all funded by SAMHSA. We are funded by the following cooperative agreements. And this presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, or PTTC under the cooperative agreements. And the opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official position of DHHS or SAMHSA. Just a couple housekeeping details to go over with you. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording and the slides will be available on the Great Lakes Current YouTube channel, in addition to the Great Lakes ATTC products page. Certificates of attendance will be emailed to all attendees. It could take up to 2 weeks for you to receive the email. At the end of today's webinar, you will be directed to a very short survey, and we would really appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes to complete it for us. If you are having technical issues, please individually message Christina Spanbauer or Stephanie Bellman in the chat section, and they'll be happy to assist you. Today will be an interactive webinar, so please respond to the speaker through the chat function. And if you're interested in any other webinars or trainings that we are doing, please feel free to follow us on social media. And I'm going to turn this over to Chris Kelly to introduce our speaker today.
Thanks, Ann. My name is Chris Kelly. I'm a woman in long-term recovery, and I'm also the state project manager for the Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC in the state of Minnesota. And I'm really excited to have Andre Johnson here to present today. So Andre is a native Detroiter and is currently the president and CEO of the Detroit Recovery Project, as Ann mentioned earlier. The Detroit Recovery Project is a multi-service agency that provides a wide spectrum of supportive services to the city's recovery community. Mr. Johnson has over 31 years of professional work experience, exemplifying a long-standing commitment and dedication to the field of substance use disorders. I've had the honor and privilege of knowing Andre through the Association of Recovery Community Organizations, and have seen him present and speak on different occasions. And I think we're up for a really exciting webinar today. So thanks, Andre, and I'll let you take it from here. You might be muted, Andre.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be part of this conversation today. And thank you so much, Chris, for your introduction. My name is Andre Johnson. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means is I have not used drugs or alcohol as of July 13th, 32 years of sobriety. And that also means that I wouldn't have been able to be the invited speaker for today's subject matter. So I'm going to go right into this implications of COVID-19 and complex post-traumatic stress disorder for opioid use disorder. But I would also be remiss if I didn't thank Chris Kelly and her entire team for helping to organize this very important conversation, particularly as it pertains to the challenges that we're faced with each in every community throughout our country, whether we're rural, urban, and or suburban. We've all seen how COVID-19 has impact just regular everyday citizens, but also individuals, particularly that have opioid use disorder. So these are some of the items that I plan to talk about as it relates to training agenda. One, training introduction and agenda, COVID-19 updates, complex post-traumatic stress disorder overview, opioid use disorder summaries, impacts of COVID-19 on complex PTSD and opioid use, epidemic and pandemic effects, strategies working with individuals in recovery, and then some cultural competencies addressed as it relates to Black Lives Matter. And then lastly, Q&A. So the purpose of this conversation really was birthed from several conversations myself and Chris Kelly had over the last few months about what's going on with our OUD population and how all these protests and COVID-19 are having an impact on our community. So I started here in the Detroit community, started asking people what were their experiences like. And I had a consensus of a lot of folks, because of COVID-19, began to experience what's known as complex post-traumatic stress disorders. And these were folks who were just everyday people, and then another cohort of individuals who are or were in long-term recovery. So we really want to kind of get a pulse of what's happening in our community professionally, and what's happening in and out of, you know, our world, so to speak. Next slide. Next slide, Ms. Lee. That's okay. So how has COVID-19 affected you? And this is where I want to take an opportunity for you all to really share with me how has COVID-19 affected you. And please feel free to write in the chat. We do want to respond to the chats, and we want to know what's going on and just kind of get a feel. So I did come up with a few bullets. Life already has anticipated stresses, anxiety, and COVID-19 adds additional hardships.
You're getting a couple of responses, Andre.
Okay.
People feeling isolated, having to work differently, adjust style, support staff working from home, another isolation, stress of the unknown. It's affecting their work life, fear of the unknown.
Okay. And those are what's this last one? Not being able to see family, friends, sad. My network is a huge part of my recovery. Thank you, Jill Hooper. And so those are some of the same components or aspects that we've seen, I've experienced as a professional as well, in terms of this. Life as we knew it pre-COVID-19 is no longer the same. And as a recovering person, recovery is really built on social support and social connections, and I'm going to talk about some of that. And I'm going to also talk about some strategies to cope with some of the anxiety and some of the stresses that have come with COVID-19. So I'm hoping that some of the solutions are embedded in this PowerPoint. And I want to thank you all who have shared some of your experiences thus far. Loneliness, isolation, it definitely all goes hand in hand. I love the what is it? I saw something. Annual vacation is important, which I don't even know if we can take a vacation these days. So let me go. Death of a loved one is important. Let me go into the slides, and I think we'll see some of the solutions in some of the slides as we move forward. Just to recap, as of July 1st, the CDC has confirmed 3.48 million cases, of 1.3 million recovered, and 138,000 confirmed deaths. The American Medical Association reported an increased number of opioid-related mortality rates. More than 35 states have reported increase in opioid-released mortality and expressed concerns for individuals with mental illness and substance use disorder. Next slide, Ms. Lee. And I'm going to respond a little bit later as relates to those two bullets. What is complex post-traumatic stress disorder? It is a psychological disorder that can develop in response to prolonged, repeated experience of interpersonal trauma in a context in which the individual has little or no chance of escape. I'm going to say that last line. Trauma in a context in which the individual has little or no chance of escape. Now here's some comparison that kind of shows the difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder usually develops following a single episode of trauma, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder involves several traumatizing events on a long-term basis. And then the second one says, patients have the capacity to forget and move on after some time. Complex patients will get flashbacks and nightmares associated with insomnia from time to time. And I'm having these pauses because I'm having these personal experiences of experiencing complex post-traumatic stress disorder, because during the onset of the epidemic or the pandemic, I remember coming to my office on Saturday, and I had a crew of our staff, and we were passing out gloves and masks, and we were sanitizing our building. And so we have two large recovery centers in Detroit. One is on the east side and one is on the west side. So I spent 2 hours in my office on the east side. Then when I got to my office on the west side, all of a sudden I was extremely exhausted and tired, to the point where I barely wanted to drive myself home. It was just like I just was out of it. And I realized at that point that I had been exposed to COVID-19. And I literally made it home and stayed in the bed for the next several days. And every morning I woke up, my throat was completely dry. It was like no water couldn't keep me hydrated. But nevertheless, I stayed in the bed, rested, quarantined myself, drank lots of fluid, couldn't eat nothing. I lost my appetite. The only thing I would eat over those several days were oranges. But during the midst of those several days, I would receive several calls back to back that where people had shared that several of our clients had passed away, and 3 of our staff had passed away, kind of like back to back and back to back. And so I can really relate to complex post-traumatic stress disorder from a personal perspective, particularly during these trying times. But also, when we talk about PTSD, it's typically associated with behavioral issues and reckless activities like sexual acting out, binge eating, abnormal drug or alcohol use. And then when you talk about post-traumatic stress, this complex PTSD, Patients are also diagnosed with borderline personality disorders and dissociative disorders as well. For both PTSD treatment methods involve short-term counseling and drug therapy, and for complex PTSD treatment methods involve multiple therapeutic sessions lasting for a very long, a much longer time. Did anybody have any comments or questions around PTSD and or complex PTSD? Right here in case you got something to say. Let me see. I want to just double check the chat. Chris, did you have anything?
No, I think this was a great layout, though, to kind of understand what we might see, you know, whether it's in ourselves, within our colleagues, within people we supervise, and then certainly the people that we work with and work for, that there's different ways to address each. And current events could certainly bring, I think, PTSD into that complex PTSD zone.
Right. And you know, Chris, you and I have been talking, and think about how, again, this complex PTSD affects our community, but it also affects our recovery community and the dynamics that are involved with the recovery community. Because, you know, the recovery community foundation has been built on social support models. And imagine being inside a submarine and being under attack while you're in a submarine, and your only resolve is to turn to what you know, which is OUD. That can be heroin, that can be prescription pills, to ease the moment, because now we have to be more creative and more resourceful to really build a growing recovery support community via online, telehealth, etc. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, Ms. Lee. Again, complex, these are some of the other PTSD symptoms, including nightmares, flashbacks, avoiding certain situations, changes in beliefs and feelings about yourself and others. Hyperarousal refers to constantly being on alert or jittery. Lack of emotional regulation, uncontrollable feelings such as explosive anger or ongoing sadness, changes in consciousness, example, forgetting traumatic event or feeling detached from your emotions or body or disassociation. And negative self-perceptions, feelings of guilt or shame, huge. Difficulties with relationships, avoiding relationships with other people out of mistrust or a feeling of not knowing how to interact with others. Loss of systems of meanings, refer to your religion or beliefs about the world.
Yeah, so Andrea, I was just seeing a lot in the chats around that pull between you know, people in recovery needing community and then experiencing that social isolation, and how the pandemic has impacted that.
Okay. Yeah, I see quite a bit of synergy, and thank you all again for your comments in the chat. I hope that I will at least discuss some of the comments in some form or fashion, whether it's directly or indirectly. And again, this is an interactive conversation so that we can talk about some of the facts, some of the effects, and also some of the solutions to this epidemic and pandemic that we are all faced with. Some of the data, and I know a lot of you all who work in the area of opioid use disorder, this is just some of the data from that revealed 128 people died daily from opioid overdose, opioids were involved in over almost 70% of all drug overdose deaths in 2018. 70% of overdose deaths, which is just alarming. Next slide, Ms. Lee. When you talk about people have difficult time enough to maintain in a recovery routine, adding social isolation and pandemic into the mix has been a life-threatening combination. Recovery is not about sobriety, but it's all about connection. So again, you know, we're talking about now we're dealing with the pandemic on top of dealing with an epidemic, and now this particularly applies to some of the needs and challenges of people in recovery. Next slide. A large part of the solution to moving forward in recovery is building social connections through meetings and social supports. And most of you all who know who works in the field, the 12-step community, whether it's 12-step NA, 12-step AA, or 12-step Fellowship Anonymous, all of those components have been, particularly for people in recovery, that's our extended family. Some people in recovery have burned all their family bridges. And so the social connections become the new families, the extended families. And so think about, now we have to have this social distance, and now we can no longer hug each other, embrace each other, like we were taught in early recovery. Removing that piece places individuals at risk. It makes people fall back into the traps of isolation, which I know was already in the chat. It makes people feel alone and lonely. The recovery community is like a tight-knit family. Anybody who's in recovery and have experienced the support of the fellowship knows that it's one of a kind. And I'll tell you, the fellowship, in my mind, worked vigilantly when COVID hit our country and our 12-step meetings had to shut down. Our groups pulled together Zoom groups all over the country. And now every time I talk to my friends around the country, oh, I'm in a Zoom meeting in Africa, or I'm in a Zoom meeting in Iraq, or, you know, I talked to a guy the other day who's been sober 45 years. He said, I don't do any more Zoom meetings in Detroit. I do all my meetings out of state. So it's interesting because now people are meeting new people, they're connecting with new people, and they're having an opportunity to really work and keep that recovery light, to keep that recovery energy, because not some people lives depend on it. Some people's lives depend on that hug every day. That hug every day is the experience of feeling love every day. And so imagine losing the love that you were once getting every day, all of a sudden. So, you know, ways to effectively relax and manage stress, set aside leisure time is vital. And oh yeah, thank you, Melissa, who talks about the inability to maintain support. Next slide, Ms. Lee, is vital. These norms have been in practice for decades and are now being challenged. As a result of the isolation encouraged during COVID-19, individuals who use opioids are at a greater risk to use alone. Without having anyone to rescue them, individuals are at an increased risk for overdose deaths. There has been some studies and some research that's being done or undergoing right now through NIDA, and they're also looking at some of the parallels around COVID-19 and opioid use disorder. In fact, Dr. Nora Volkow, she actually talked about OUD users and how it affects the respiratory. She said three things. One is respiratory, and anything that affects the respiratory, the heart, and breathing have been kind of the three deadly sins, for lack of better words, of overdose or death as relates to COVID-19. So those are some of the studies they're looking at as it relates to the impacts, the physical health complications that come with OUD. And then if you are out trying to buy illegal drugs, you put yourself at a higher risk to contract COVID-19. I like the statement. We need everybody to have naloxone in their homes and in their communities. We have to have all of it. And also, we want to encourage our people in recovery to find a way of doing something that they enjoy alone. And that may be going for a walk in the park. That may be doing some mindfulness activities, breathing, and an opportunity to learn how to breathe, breathing exercising, and the benefits of breathing exercise. For example, it helps to calm the central nervous system. Keep a sense of humor. Sometimes just keeping a sense of humor, trying to find some laughter during the darkest moments can help to relax you. And just being able to practice relaxation effectively is vital. It really is really important. And those are just some of the strategies to employ as it relates to individuals who are in early recovery. Next slide, Ms. Lee. So we'll talk about some of the goals, objectives as it relates to this complex PTSD. Next slide, Ms. Lee. Just being conscious of, other strategies to reduce symptoms, reduce the anxiety, and also improve coping skills, which is, being free of panic episodes, recognizing and planning for top 5 anxiety-provoking situations, developing strategies for distraction when fixating on the future. And so sometimes I understand and I can relate to trying to plan for the future, predict what the future looks like, and you get to the point where mapped out everything, and then you have this question pop up: what if it goes wrong? And then you start just responding to the negative thought process and energy. And so I think it's important that we understand our own triggers as it relates to anxiety. And anxiety, I think, hits a lot of adults later in life. Okay, next. So it's important to think about decision making. Make short and simple to-do lists and complete 3 tasks each day. And so now we begin to set ourselves up with and challenge ourselves to have some goals and objectives every day. And when we spend our energy thinking about 3 tasks that we're going to accomplish every day, and then we celebrate every day with some little success and also some positive self-talk and also some positive journaling. Documenting, writing our wins are beneficial to our self-esteem as well. Identify 3 options for any major decisions. Be able to weigh options, make simple decisions within 5 minutes. So sometimes we have to weigh out major decisions. Next slide, Ms. Lee. Here are some of the resources that you all can have at your disposal as relates to additional facts, research, studies, or anything as it pertains to mental health and substance abuse services. NIDA, as pertains to research around National Institute on Drug Abuse, National Institute of Mental Health, Department of Health and Human Service, also Great Lakes Addiction Transfer Technology Center, and obviously you can use Detroit Recovery Project as your resource as well. So now it's 12:34, and we wanted to use the last time to kind of have a conversation and reflect more on some of the questions that's been asked. Chris, would you like to take the lead on that?
Sure. So anyone can feel free to ask any direct questions here that you might have for Andre. I think throughout the chat here, I heard someone comment about the American Indian community not being able to hold some cultural ceremonies and powwows throughout the summer because they've been canceled due to COVID-19. And that has a great impact on them, their families, as well as the broader community.
Wow.
Are there ways that the Detroit Recovery Project and the community in Detroit has been able to maintain any different cultural?
You know, I think that's a very good point, and that's why I said in the very beginning, I think all of our communities, rural, suburban, urban, whether it's predominantly African Americans or Native Americans, because we have a very unique, diverse population in Detroit. We have like one of the largest Middle Eastern populations, the second largest Middle Eastern population outside of Iran or Iraq in the world. And then we have a large area where there's a Hispanic community. We have 11 native tribes. And so we're kind of all over the place. And I think that with restrictions placed on our states and our countries, that we're all sort of we're experiencing that based on where your state is at. Our state right now is allowed to have 100 people in the same proximity, outdoors only. Face masks must be worn. Our governor made an announcement this past week that if people are in restaurants and bars not wearing masks, that they will close those establishments down and fine those establishments with liquor, repossessing their liquor license. So I think that large groups have, and then if you're a large group outside, you have to adhere to the social distance. So I really think it boils down to the communities, and it also boils down to us being a little more creative, even if we can have a big TV screen and have ways to communicate. I think some communities also comes with challenges, and those challenges are internet connections. Those challenges are internet access. You know, there's a digital divide in some communities where cell phones, internet is a luxury. And so some people don't have what it takes to stay connected. And one of the other challenges I've seen is individuals who are actually computer literate. And so getting on Zoom can be a challenge. You know, I've been on some of these Zoom 12-step meetings where we have 300 and 400 people and don't nobody know how to chat. So I need another meeting after that meeting. I like what Ms. Perryman said, knowing how to access varied information. For Latino communities, how has your state been able to meet their needs? How are some creative ways to bring them into the recovery community more despite the COVID-19 in a non-digital way without putting them at risk? Great question, Bianca. I'm not sure I have an answer to that question right now. I do know that we are working more and more diligently to make sure that we have telehealth services available to all those people who need it. And we're just adhering to our state laws. Our recovery centers are open every day. We were shut down for about 4 weeks. The work we do is considered an essential service. We have equipped all of our workers with personal property equipment. We have the big clear screens at all our desks. We provide gloves and masks to individuals as needed. And so we're trying to be there. We're back having groups. We're having groups, individual sessions. Our groups are social distant groups where everybody is 6 feet apart. And everybody's required to wear their mask. And we're just doing the best we can to support everybody during this pandemic. Yes, somebody asked if there are any outdoor meetings. There are some outdoor meetings that have started in the Detroit area over the course of the last 2 months. I think we have meetings on Saturday and Sunday in Palmer Park. If anybody's in this discussion from the Detroit area, Palmer Park is one of our beautiful historical parks in the Detroit area on Saturdays and Sundays. Thank you for your question too, Bianca. Let me go through some of the other chats. I've seen that.
I know Terry just jumped in and said it's important to balance screen time as much, you know, and then watching news 24/7 about COVID and or Black Lives Matter can cause her anxiety. I'm sorry, can cause them anxiety. I want to be informed as I am an advocate, but I also need to be stayed engaged in self-care.
Okay, who said that, Chris?
Terry Sprader.
Okay, I love it. All right, Terry Sprader, thank you for your comment. I think you've said it. It's important to balance screen time as watching news 20. Yeah, because I've been hearing about people binge watching on the news 24/7, keeping up with COVID-19, and every 2 to 3 hours there's some new data, new statistics, and some new anxiety created. And then she has N or BLM can cause me anxiety. I want to be informed that I'm an advocate, but I also need to make sure that I'm engaged in self-care. Absolutely. I think self-care is critical for us and for us all right now, because just everyday living can create some aspects of anxiety and stress. And so I think in light of COVID-19, we were already isolated for 3 or 4 months in our homes. I've seen some relationships, people grow together, and then I've seen marriages where some people have divorced after those 3 to 4 months. So I only believe that the external things that affect us outside of ourselves can also have an internal effect. And those internal effects are the stress, the anxiety. Me being an African American and watching the George Floyd incident, it caused some distress. In fact, I was pulled over by a police officer about 2 weeks ago in my car, and I was taking a friend of mine's home, and it was, a black officer and a white officer, and they wanted my registration and my insurance, and they said that my registration, my license plate was registered to another vehicle. And I very kindly said that that's absolutely impossible, because I've had this vehicle for several years, so I don't know how that can even be real. But, I was very cordial and patient. And my friend in my car was like, well, I'm about to call the deputy police and the chief. And I said, we don't have to go through that. It's nothing to worry about. And so, long story short, they came back, and the officer, the Caucasian officer, said it was my mistake. I apologize. I typed in the wrong information. I didn't mean anything by it. Now, this incident happening 2-3 weeks in the midst of everything, of course, I felt some anger and some frustration, and knowing that I haven't done anything wrong. But I do have to constantly check myself to make sure that the anxiety is not getting the best. So I think it's important to turn the TV off and go inside. Look at how we feel internally, and look at our internal stress, our internal anxiety, our internal feelings and emotions about everything, and start writing about it, talking about it, and working towards recovery. If you need therapy, if you need cognitive behavioral therapy, there are licensed psychologists, licensed counselors, licensed social workers, licensed certified recovery coaches that can help you and your loved ones during these processes to help process these trying times in our country. Try not to overwhelm yourself, but I do think that we have to be culturally competent and aware of the times we're living in. And we're living in some hard times, some trying times, where there's a lot of division, where there's a lot of, and so we have the responsibility as professionals and recovery practitioners to continue to strive to build our recovery community. Somebody talked about in the chat earlier, our fundings has been challenged. Our fundings continue to be challenged. Some people don't believe the importance of recovery. Some people believe that if you use drugs or alcohol, you need to suffer, and taxpayers shouldn't have to contribute to you getting better. Some person, let me see, somebody says my self-care involves is turning off the live TV news during these days. Amen, Emily. I do believe that self-care does involve turning the radio off, turning the TV off, and finding a quiet place, getting to a quiet place. And sometimes it's just too much chatter going in and out of our ears, going in and out of our head, and we'll be all over the place like a ping pong. But I think recovery is important to find some peace, to find some mindfulness activities that can help you to find some patience, some serenity, and some hope. Because TV, media, we can't find serenity and hope binge watching on Fox TV or binge watching on CNN TV 24/7. We have to take time for our own mental health. So I love it. What are some tips you can give for those who are trying to avoid seeing all of the chaos to do with riots and COVID, that want to cut off social media and stay home, but don't want to feel isolated in their mental health? I would suggest that you find some videos that are the opposite of the COVID-19, that are the opposite of riots. I would suggest that you find something that's more empowering, something that's more uplifting, something that gives you some hope. Find some music. Find some music that gives you joy. Like, I just like listening to the old song, how's it go? Love and Happiness. I like watching old videos. That's the kind of stuff I like to do. I haven't been on Facebook. I'm celebrating a year in recovery off Facebook. I haven't been on Facebook because that stuff takes too much time, too much energy, and it drains you. Some of the things personally I've been doing is challenging myself to walk every day. I took 15,000 steps the other day. I was geeked. I was happy. I still look like I'm pregnant. I still look like a turkey, little legs and fat stomach, and 3 months pregnant, so y'all gotta pray for me. But I'm gonna keep working on that. But I do think leisure time, sense of humor, relaxation, and not over-committing is very, very important to maintaining some peace and some serenity.
Andre, we did have a question from Bianca earlier asking about bilingual peers. Do you have bilingual peers working at your RCO?
Absolutely. We do have Spanish-speaking peers we only have one. And we also have, so in Detroit, there's a Latino family service, and there's a company called Detroit Hispanic Corporation, and they're the two largest organizations that kind of represent those communities. So we have strong memorandums of understanding and partnerships. So if we run into clients who are fluent speaking in those languages, we do have a backup. And that's the same for the Middle Eastern population as well. A lot of folks speak Arabic. But we've also experienced where we've had folks from Latino community that couldn't speak Spanish, which was funny, but it was cool. And so, you know, we help people of all ethnic backgrounds. We don't necessarily agree with not letting people go through our doors and not providing the help, support, and resources. But
And
that's a great question, Bianca.
Yeah, thank you. And from Molly, she asked earlier, what assistance is there for families who may be quarantined with someone who is in recovery and or relapsing?
Oof. Yeah, that can be a tough one. Only thing I would suggest is that if the person is relapsing, I would strongly encourage that they find the 12-step support groups that are online throughout the day and require those individuals to participate in those groups, but also link those individuals up with therapists and psychologists so that they can begin to have some telehealth services. And it's also an opportunity to really discuss the importance of love, because see, if the person is using drugs and alcohol and quarantined at home, that means that person is going outside their family, and then they put their family at risk when they come and go and not adhere to the quarantine or adhere to the social distance, because it's kind of hard to adhere to that. And then also look up for Al-Anon and again 12-step AANA. The telehealth community has exploded in our country. And so I think if the person, and then the family needs therapy a lot of times. The family needs support. And so I would encourage that the person who's using get the support and help he or she needs, but also the family gets the support and help that they need. And lastly, the family sometimes need to be educated around codependency and how to kind of break some of those codependent habits as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add to that as well that there's a great organization called the Center for Motivation and Change, and they have, they've written a book called Beyond Addiction. That's a great resource for family members, as well as through their website, again, the Center for Motivation and Change, they have some guides that family members can download that give really concrete tips based on craft and motivational interviewing and different evidence-based practices that have shown best ways to, you know, live with boundaries and love someone who might be active in their addiction. And I know our local RCO, Recovery Community Organization in Minnesota, has a family recovery group that's not related to any particular pathway, but it's open to anybody who wants to, you know, get some support for themselves around living with or being in relationship with a family member who's active in their addiction.
Chris, they asked if you can post that in the site, the email. I mean, the website.
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Okay. Let's see, a few more chats came in. Looks like the Urban Survivors Union has an online support group. Not familiar with that, but that sounds good. Chris Shaw asks, what are strategies that can be utilized to break down the us versus them mentality and barriers that produces for someone transitioning through recovery from a past and current supervision of involvement in the criminal justice system? Whew. Oh, okay. Chris Shaw, man, Chris, you giving me a loaded gun. I think the key to that really is stigma, breaking down stigma. I think having town hall meetings that focus on stigma as relates to addiction, as relates to incarceration, and as relates to the support that people need, whether you're coming out of prison or whether you're coming out of an active addiction. People need support. And right now we have more people incarcerated and more people who are actively using drugs and alcohol than we have people who can support those communities or support those individuals as they exit out of those programs. In other words, when you just like in Detroit, Michigan, we have, I think the last number was 50, 60,000 inmates in the state of Michigan. The city of Detroit budget was $3 billion in 2005. Michigan Department of Corrections budget was over three something billion dollars. So, and at the time in 2005, we had a population of about 700,000 people. So I think that there has to be some strategies to really work to develop and create some rehabilitation within our incarceration program. And I think that we have to also develop more strategies to create more success and recovery support services for individuals in early recovery who need to acquire long-term recovery. And that's just a big process in itself. Thank you for posting the site, Center for Motivation and Change, Chris. I hope I answered your question okay, Chris Shaw.
Well, and I think, Andre, too, that leads to a topic of, as recovery community members, we're often advocates, both little a and big A advocates. So we're often advocating for the people we're working with, but we're also advocates at a, local, state, and national level to ensure that the, policies are fair and equitable, and fighting that so that policies are fair and equitable, that breaks down some of these barriers that people face, especially when they're, returning from incarceration.
Mm-hmm. I certainly agree. And, and that's, I think particularly us, Chris, who are in recovery and are of leadership positions, we understand and value the importance of advocacy. Facing the voices of recovery has taken the lead on changing the face and voice of recovery in DC, and working on the Capitol and doing a lot of advocating, whether it's with Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, or if it's with on the Capitol, dealing with Congress, dealing with Office of National Drug Control Policy. I think the more we begin to advocate, the more we create interactive and have the conversation about the importance of supporting recovery, because some people still believe the old myths of once an addict or once an alcoholic, you will always be an addict or alcoholic. And so we have to break down those myths, and we have to break down those stereotypes, and we have to come together to work towards linking solutions for change. That's what was posted. Thank you, Kari. Love it, love it, love it. And I think, Chris, in a way, that's what you and I are attempting to do as it relates to just having this conversation today, is that, a year ago, we were not having this conversation. And so it's important that we continue to have these conversations, and hopefully these conversations can turn into some policy recommendations, and also turn into some change in our community, some systemic change. Peter, thank you, Peter. Peter says 12 steps leans too heavily on abstinence as the end point. I don't necessarily agree. I think the abstinence is one aspect, but the 12 step, from my understanding, Peter, is about living with accordance to a set of spiritual principles. And so those spiritual principles that people practice on a daily basis are what helps people to have peace, serenity, but also help people on the path of productivity, help people on the path of giving back to their community, and helping people become more sufficient and independent. But I think if we're doing anything that can focus on, okay, I know, but why are personal methadone silenced? Oh, argument, I know. Well, yeah, we'll have to have a whole nother conversation about methadone. But I think that, and so part of some of the philosophies that's been established over the last 20 years or 2 decades have been, there are multiple pathways of recovery. And so how a person chooses to find their recovery, and if they find it through methadone maintenance, buprenorphine, naloxone, or an abuse, God bless them. We don't necessarily judge people by that. You know, we want to remove ourselves from judging people, because a major part of being a recovery coach, essential attribute is being non-judgmental. I like this book, Chris. You mentioned book Beyond Addiction, Motivation and Change. What is that about?
Yeah, so they actually wrote, it's Jeff Foote and I can't remember his last name, but they wrote a book, and it's really about, so it's Beyond Addiction, how science and kindness help people change. And so it's a great guide for families, and it really walks families through, like I said earlier, how to stay in relationship with their loved ones who might, be misusing substance or have a substance use disorder. And so it talks a lot about how, why do people change? How do people change? When we say, meet people where they're at or start where they are. I think I took a training from them, and one of the key points they help you as a recovery coach to work with families on is behaviors make sense. So how their loved one is behaving as far as their substance misuse or substance use really makes sense if you look at where they are in their lives. And if you start from there and use, positive communication and positive reinforcement, that you have a better opportunity of helping them reach their recovery goals. And so it's just for me, it was a life-changing book. As a person in recovery, as a family member of a family that has addiction, and then as a recovery coach, it was really a life-changing book to read, because it was very concrete and built up my skills and gave me different ideas of how to really love somebody through a really difficult time in their life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it sounds like a good book. I've written it down myself, so I plan to make that a book to read over the summer. And I think this is the opportunity. We got to find the silver lining in life through our ups and downs, our challenges, our good moments and bad moments. And the silver lining for me has been able to have a little more quiet time than I usually have. And so for me, I'm looking for 2 to 3 books to read over the summer, and just make the best of this situation. And so I think that sounds like a great a great book that you suggest to read. Let me see. Cassie, I'm a member of the 12-step program, and while I've heard other members be judgmental in regards to MAT, there are many members, including myself, that understand that there are all different pathways. I was on MAT for the first year of my recovery and heavily involved in the 12-step group. Well, thank you for your comment, Cassie. I do think it's important, and I think that we're evolving. I mean, the 12-step community was established in the 30s and 50s, somewhere around that, and now we're in 2020. The MAT methadone was established in the late 60s, and now in 2020, with this increase of MAT, medicated assisted treatment, now we have pills that help people cope with their opioids. So I think as a nation, we're continuously working to evolve and learn from our past. And I think the one thing we all learn from our past, particularly as pertains to the field of addiction, that we cannot be judgmental. When I got straight in the late 80s, the AA folks say, they didn't like NA, and NA folks say they don't like AA. And then the Fellowship Anonymous support group was established, and that was a 12-step support group that was established and created by people who were on methadone because they felt alienated from individuals who were in other 12-step programs. So I just think we live in this society where people are quick to pass judgment and put their programs and their personal beliefs and think that your personal belief supersedes somebody else's personal belief. I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. I think we all have some growing, we all have some learning to do. Catherine Brown said, can I get the name of that book?
I'll type it in again here, Catherine. When I think too, when I was facilitating different recovery coach academies, Andre, we often referred to, building an individual's recovery capital. So it really didn't matter what path or what group they belonged to. It was more important to help them find connection, whether that was, a boxing club, a knitting club, a book club, anything club. Where can they get connected to others that are going to support them in their pathway to wellness, whatever that looks like for them? And so, I think AA is one of the most well-known fellowships, but others are emerging and becoming really robust. And so I think the most important thing is that people just get connected to a group of people that love and care about them and really have their best interest in mind, regardless of what pathway that is.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do agree. I think that's why I said we're steady evolving, and we're steady growing, and we have to continuously grow and think outside the box and be creative, because social capital is important. A lot of folks, when you're in the midst of drugging and alcoholism, you don't see or you don't realize that you have strengths. So this whole strength-based approach is vital for people who are seeking recovery, because a lot of times you've been put down, you've been alienated from your family, you've been stigmatized, you've been in and out of these systems, and you come into these programs with no hope whatsoever. And these programs are what give people hope. I always say when I came into the program at 18 years old, I was broken. But after leaving treatment, I had a therapist, I had an older white woman who was about 4'7", and here I am 6'4". And once I got done with treatment, I felt like she was my Yoda and I was Luke Skywalker. And the force was within. And so I think it's important that we realize that we are beacons of hope. We have to give people hope, and they have to believe that they can be better despite of their past. And I think if we don't make sure that that's a priority as recovery practitioners and professionals and individuals who are in recovery, then we're missing the mark. But this is a hope program.
Yeah, agreed.
And it's a program built on love. And so that's the other part. You know, if you're loving your fellow brother and sister, you're not judging your fellow brother or sister. Who wants to be, most people want to be connected with the community of love versus not being loved. Smart Recovery can be another support group. And thankfully, so many groups have gone online, which provides structure. If not that, hug is all we need. Virtual hugs, virtual love. We're giving them out. They for free, but you got to show up to get it.
Well, and Andre, so I kind of wanted to go back just for a moment to the topic of the PTSD versus complex PTSD. And, you know, if we're working with individuals, whether we're a peer recovery specialist or a clinical staff member, what are some things that we might see, and especially considering we're in the age of telehealth, that might, you know, perk our ears up to say, I think this person needs additional support. So when we're in that space with an individual, and I would say most people who've had a substance use disorder have had some sort of PTSD in their lives. What might make us think this could be going into complex PTSD?
So, Nicole, if you could just put that slide back up, that kind of differentiates the two in terms of complex and regular PTSD. And I think it really boils down to the individual and the type of flashback images and experiences that they are having. And that's what really differentiates what's complex PTSD and what's considered PTSD. And so there's some variables around, single episode of trauma. And so I think related to the complex PTSD, because we're still, I don't think we've dealt with something outside of our control like COVID-19. You know,
Mm-hmm.
1 minute they say the data's going down. The next minute they say that, you know, after July 4th, Dr. Anthony Fauci reported that we had 250,000 new cases of COVID-19. Now Florida is in hotspot. And so those are experiences that we begin to internalize. And that's why I say it's really important that we begin to do an inventory on what we're internalizing and what we're externalizing. Because when we internalize certain things, it comes out via externalization. And so if we're not sleeping good, if we're having nightmares, if we're having insomnia, those are some of the complex PTSD signs. And also be quite honest, certain drugs and alcohol also have a major impact on our mental health being. So if you use certain drugs and alcohol for a significant amount of time, there's a strong correlation and possibility you could have developed a personality disorder or a dissociative disorder. And these are disorders that often need ongoing treatment, ongoing therapy, ongoing professional help to help people to live and be able to live productive lives. When you look at this last box that says treatment methods involve multiple therapeutic sessions lasting for a longer time. So that means that when you look at PTSD, it says short term. So basically the difference between complex and just regular PTSD, complex is more ongoing challenge. So that means you may need longer, typically some of my colleagues who are psychologists, they tend to see their clients on an average 6 months to 5 or 6 years. And again, it depends on the progress. It depends on the treatment modality. Some people are doing cognitive behavioral therapy to cope with their post-traumatic stress disorder. They're also looking at some behavior modification programs to cope with the complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's really tailored. Recovery and therapeutic support are really tailored around the individual where they are, and that's the beauty about our whole recovery process, is really meeting people exactly where they are, and also examining where they are and what they've experienced and how we can help put them on the path of recovery. Peter, I see Peter is a, Peter asked and raised some good stuff. He says misogyny, racism, the war on drugs, being a war on us. What's this? Xenophobia, a basis for complex issues for so many of us. And so those, again, those are all components that can certainly attribute to complex post-traumatic stress disorder, racism, war on drugs, war on us. And I think it's, again, and the beauty of having therapy and being part of a support group is it really allows you to foster and build social connections with people of all races. I mean, I've had the luxury of building recovery networks in East Africa, walking the streets of Zanzibar, or the streets of India, or the streets of Thailand, attending 12-step conferences all over the country and having colleagues all over the country. It opened and broadened my perspective. And so, and having those experiences of unconditional love with people all over the world has broadened my experience. And so I think for me as a person in long-term recovery, and having those kind of relationships helped me to stay centered, and it also helps me to sustain my own peace and serenity, where I don't necessarily subscribe to everything that I hear in the media or subscribe to everything I hear on the news, but I put my efforts and energy into subscribing to being a better me. And I think for me, that's what recovery is all about. Okay,
Well
how we looking,
put.
Craig?
Pretty good. Are there any final questions from the audience here? And or any final thoughts from you, Andre? Maybe we could just run through the list again. I like always ending with solutions. So what can we do when we're, you know, kind of facing this pandemic on top of an epidemic, and then addressing racial tensions, and you know, and we're trying to keep our head afloat and provide support and help to other people. You know, what are, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
Oh, I just thought, like I said, I like to end on the solutions.
Well, I think, you know, it's really, really important to take inventory of ourselves, of our loved ones, our friends, and help people to see if they may experience some of the criteria that surround complex post-traumatic stress disorder. For our friends and family who are part of a recovery community, sometimes people need help with linking up with Zoom 12-step recovery meetings. I've talked to several people, older and younger, that had little experience with accessing internet and found that Zoom was somewhat, they were saying, I don't want to do it, but I had to look a little deeper and realize that they didn't have the basic computer literacy to access internet and telehealth and telezoom 12-step meeting. So I would just urge all of the participants today. Well, first of all, I want to say again, thank you 1,000 times, Chris, for allowing me to be your presenter. And I want to thank you, your entire team, for this opportunity. And then second of all, I think the solutions are really relying on the recovery network that we have at our disposal, and also relying on therapists, whether it's a licensed practice social worker, licensed practice counselor, or a psychologist and a psychiatrist. Some people may need medication, and psychiatrists are the ones who prescribe medication, depending on the significance of individuals' disorders. And lastly, I wish that all of us have a great summer and make the best of it, and all of us work towards our mental and our mental health and our well-being. it's what keeps us going every day. And so we have to take time and invest and make sure that we can have a peace of mind during this never-ending nightmare. And the never-ending nightmare is COVID-19. It's not going away no time soon. But we have to stay centered. We have to find peace. We have to do what we need to do for our own personal well-being. Thank you again.
Thanks, Andre. It's been a joy to have you. For everyone, there's, look to your recovery community organizations, your recovery community centers, your recovery cafes, your harm reduction communities, because there's a whole slew of folks out there, boots on the ground doing this work every day that can wrap around individuals who may be struggling and looking for that connection. And they're the experts on how to really truly meet someone in the community, whether it's virtually or physically, and wrap around them and provide them that support they need to help them stay in recovery. And with that, I think Anne is going to wrap it up for us with a quick survey. And Anne, I'll let you take it from there.
Thanks, Chris. When you log off, the survey will pop up automatically. So if, like I said, it's 10 questions. So if you could just very quickly take it, that would be fantastic. And again, just a reminder that the presentation and the slides and any other information that we shared, like the names of books and that kind of thing, will be posted on our website. It usually takes about a week. So if you want to just check back, all of those resources will be there. And we appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you very much, Andre and Chris. This was a very, very informative and practical webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.